This evening we have Robert Scragg with us. Rob lives in Tyne and Weir and he is a member of the Northern Crime Syndicate. He's had loads of different jobs, including pizza delivery, a karate instructor, football coach, and also a bookseller before he took the plunge into crime writing. So, Rob, welcome, and we'll start with asking you what inspired you to become an author?
It was largely down to what I read and still read. To be honest, I've read mainly crime for years and years and years now. And when you get to that bit, either in a good book or even in a film, where you get to that part and you think, I think it's so and so, like it's Colonel Mustard in the library with the candlestick type of thing. So I was coming up with what I thought it was, and sometimes I was right, sometimes I wasn't. But it got to the point where some of the ones that I was coming up with, I thought, actually, that I was wrong, but mine wasn't too bad, was it? And I just started to see some of these building up to the point where I thought, actually, I wonder if there's any legs in any of the ideas I've got. And then I just thought, yeah, I'm going to give it a go and see what happens. I hadn't done any kind of formal writing courses or anything like that, so it was really born out of a love of reading the genre as much as anything.
So how did you go about getting published?
It was, as I'm sure most writers will tell you, it's a long road for the vast majority of us, and I was no different. It took, from starting my first chapter to actually getting the book out, it took about 8 years. And that wasn't 8 years with the writing, I hasten to add. That was basically me just making excuses and getting sidetracked by other things. So I've still got a day job now, as I did at the time. I moved house twice in that period. Went from one relationship to another during that period. I've got my I've got 3 kids now. Had just the one at the time, but had my daughter as well. So I'd let other things get in the way. And it wasn't till about 2011. I did a charity mountain trek with a friend of mine who casually dropped into conversation that he was busy writing a book, and he loves crime as well. And I said, well, that's funny you mentioned that. I've known you for a good few years. You never mentioned that. I started one as well. So that's what prompted me to go back to it. And from there, it probably took about another 2 years to get the manuscript polished. I used a editorial consultancy to help me, a company called the Literary Consultancy, who are superb, by the way. I'm not on commission, but I would highly recommend them. And then I Googled crime fiction agents. I looked in the back of a lot of the books that I read from some of my favorite authors, found out who their agents were. I just went online and looked for what they wanted to see. Most of them, it's a fairly similar formula. They want to see 3 chapters and a synopsis. So I rattled out about 3 dozen submissions to different agents. And on the first time of asking, I got 3 who were interested in the full book, all of whom ultimately said no. And when I first got those 3 say yes, I thought, get in, that's it, I've made it. I'll start mentally drafting my resignation letter. And of course, it doesn't quite work out like that. And it was actually the second bite of the cherry for me that worked. So the second time around, I had 5 agents interested, and ultimately one of them came in with an offer. And then they managed to hook me up with Alison and Busby, who are my publishers. So it wasn't a quick journey by any stretch, but well worth the effort.
Excellent. So where do you actually do your writing? I know Roald Dahl had a fabulous writing shed in his garden, and in my head, all writers have got these lovely places that they're escaped to.
Well, I mean, you can see from my backdrop, I've got a nice set of bookshelves I've just had put in the new house, and I'd love to say it's all done here, but we've literally just moved in, and they didn't exist about 4 weeks ago. The majority of it was back before lockdown, would have been in cafes. I don't know what it is about just sitting in a cafe. I don't know if it's because you're kind of surrounded by people and like the ebb and flow of conversation, and you might see someone who looks like an interesting character, or sometimes I overhear a snippet of conversation that I get a bit of inspiration from. But I love writing in cafes, and there's a few in particular that have had a lot of business from me as a result. The likes of the Surf Cafe in Tynemouth, what was Olives at the Station at Whitley Bay. I think it's still in the Bear now. And a couple of others. So mainly there, but the rest was in my office in my previous house.
Rob, I'm gutted that you didn't say you go to libraries to do your writing. Gutted. But you have done some of your writing there, obviously, haven't you?
I'll change my answer for next time.
Right, okay.
No, I have done some in North Shields Library. but well, they've got coffee there, but they don't serve hot lunches and stuff, or they didn't at the time I was doing the bulk of it anyway.
So with your books, where do you get your inspiration from?
It's a bit of a mix, to be honest. It can be anything from, I could read an article online, I could see something on the news, and sometimes it's being inspired by something you see on TV. So, to give you an example, there's one that I've written which hasn't been sold on yet, so it's still kind of out there on submission, and it's set up in the Northeast. And I was watching it was actually an American crime drama called Ray Donovan. And for anyone who hasn't seen that, it centers around a good old-fashioned Catholic family, of which that's kind of what my family looks like as well. Huge family, very close knit. And in this particular show, there was there's three brothers and a sister, and the sister had died quite a number of years ago, and sadly took her own life. And I remember watching an episode of that, thinking, "But what if she didn't? What if someone had killed her? Like, why would they do that? Who would do that and try and cover it up? And how could that happen? And how would the brothers react? And how would that impact on the family?" So in no way, shape, or form nabbing any storylines from Ray Donovan, but the spark of an idea came from that, and then made me think like, actually, so what if I did this, and this? And then the story just kind of started to flow from there. Or sometimes, I mentioned cafes before. You do overhear some really interesting bits and pieces without being I'm not a full-on eavesdropper. But again, to put a bit of context and give you another example, I remember being sat in a cafe in Covent Garden, and I've still not used this line to this date, but I've got it scribbled in my notes somewhere. And I was just sitting writing it was actually the first book at the time, and I just overheard snippets from the table next to me, and two ladies were sat chatting, and one of them turned to the other one and said, "Well, if I knew it was the last time I'd ever see him, I would have told him how I felt. Oh, sorry, if it was the last time we'd pray together, I would have told him how I felt." And my ears just perked up, and I was thinking, like, why was it the last time? Is he dead? Have you had an argument? What's happened to him? What would you have told him? How do you feel? And I jotted that down as a line, and I still don't know to this day where I'll actually use that. So if you see it pop up in a future book, you know where. If you try and nab it for a future book of your own, you'll be hearing from my solicitors.
Do you find that wherever you are, you're absorbing things that you can potentially use in your books?
I think so, yeah. I think I find it hard to turn that part of me off now. I've got on uploaded on the cloud, I've got a Word document I just call Random Wordlets. And that started out as just a page, 2 pages with just a few little scribblings on. That's about 35, 40 pages now. And that's everything from ideas for titles of books, and I don't even know what the book would be, but just a title came to me, or an idea for a character name, or even just a particular train of thought, all sorts, just everyday kind of observations, really, of stuff that I'll find a home for eventually, and all the way through to full-on plot ideas, like just a 1 or 2 liner about, what if ... and I can kind of dip back into there if I'm running short of ideas.
So obviously you're collecting ideas as you're going along, but how do you stop yourself from absorbing ideas from the books that you're reading?
That's a good question. And I don't know if I make a conscious effort not to at the time. I've not had any complaints from anyone saying that I've got anything in my books that I've lifted from theirs. But it's an interesting one, because I think there's a commonality across a lot of crime books, and I think police procedurals in particular have got a lot of commentary. There's a body, someone dies, all that kind of stuff, and there's only so many ways you can kill someone. But I think for me, the real differentiator for me is in the characters. It's not even so much in the plot. It's about the people who actually drive your plot forward for me, that really hopefully make mine and whoever else's books stand out. And I think they are the most individual parts of any book, really. So I put a lot of effort into plotting out who they are, what they're all about, how they think, what kind of person they are beforehand. And if I look at what I read, it's the characters that stay with me, probably more so than plots. So I'm fairly confident that I've not stepped too close to anybody else's. I've not all of a sudden got a 6'5" ex-military policeman and kind of lurking around righting wrongs or anything like that.
I'm going to talk to you a little bit about your characters later, but can I ask why your books are set in London?
Do you know, I've been asked that a few times, and I kind of feel a little bit bad every time, because I think, well, yeah, I want to get some of my Northeast stuff out there, and I've written 3 now that are set in the Northeast, which hopefully will be some of the next stuff I'll bring out. But at the time, simple answer is I was not full-time living down there, but I was down there 3-4 days a week for my day job. I was my girlfriend at the time lived down there. So I would typically go down there on like a Sunday night, and I'd stay through there till Wednesday, Thursday, and I was only up here for a couple of days a week at the time. So it was the London streets that I was walking around. It was the London atmosphere I was soaking in. And for the very first book that I wrote, which this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. So the first one that came out wasn't the first one I wrote. So this one, What Falls Between the Cracks, was my debut, but the first one I wrote was actually Nothing Else Remains. And without giving any spoilers away, for Nothing Else Remains, I felt I needed a bigger stage than Newcastle. I needed somewhere where it was a little less personable, and people could be a little bit more anonymous. Whereas for me, I think the Northeast has got a bit more of more of a friendlier vibe to it than my experience of London. Not that I've got anything against London or Londoners, but I think the Northeast wouldn't have worked for that particular plot. I didn't really see it as a series initially at the time, and then it just kind of, obviously it stayed where it is because of that.
So yeah, current book, the End of the Line, was written totally in the pandemic. How did that affect your writing? How did that affect you as an author?
If anything, it probably made me more focused, I think, because so for a day job, I work in HR, and the pandemic from day one of lockdown has just made that an absolute whirlwind in terms of kind of the demands during the day, and meant that I was working longer hours as well. So the time that I did set aside to write was generally always in an evening, normally after the kids are in bed, so probably about 8 o'clock at night. And I generally set a word count rather than a time limit to write. And I always aim for at least 1,000 words a day. And sometimes that takes an hour on a good day. On a bad day, it might take 3. But it made me really painfully aware of how little free time I had, even though, ironically, being locked down and couldn't really go anywhere. With having 2 young ones at the age I've got, at the time they were 2 and 1. So not a great deal of free time, certainly in the early mornings. And then by the time I've done a day's work and they're down for bed, it was a bit of a kind of a mental slog at times to sit down in front of the laptop and actually then churn out 1,000 words. So I had to be really, I guess, more disciplined than I probably normally would have been.
I'm amazed that you actually had any chance to write. It sounds as though it's been pretty full on.
You and me both.
Obviously, writers are quite social, as we know, authors. So how's that affected you, not being able to meet up with other authors and do, crime festivals and events, things like that?
It's kind of been swings and roundabouts, really. Obviously, I missed the festival circuit because, again, having 2 kids the age I do, we don't tend to hit the town every weekend or be out and about. So festivals were about 90% of my social life. And I've made some really, really good friends through the crime community and festivals. The flip side of that is we've discovered new ways to reach readers through Zoom events like this. We'd not long formed the National Crime Syndicate, Northern Crime Syndicate, kind of late last year. And we'd been looking at doing some face-to-face events. So we then had to quickly flip that on its head and look at the virtual side of things. And I don't know if any of the audience have been able to make it to any or many of those events yet, but we've probably averaged about an event a month, I think. And that's ranged from either panels, or we do a slightly quirky one called Whose Crime Is It Anyway, where we make up a story from scratch with some audience participation and try and do like a 1-hour bestseller. So we've had to kind of flip it on its head like that. But I guess probably one of the other big things for me is, I don't know if any of you have either attended or heard of an event called Noir at the Bar, which is where writers will get together and read a sample of their work, generally in the Town Wall Bar in Newcastle, or there's versions of this all over the world. and that went online too. And I already knew a few of the participants in that, like Vic Watson. But then that kind of morphed from the events to staying on for a few drinks afterwards and having a bit of a, we were calling it an after party. And the writers who have most often hung around on there as well have become really good friends of mine as well. So while it's, obviously I'd rather we hadn't had to be locked down, but I have made some really close friends through it as well, who I can't wait to actually have a proper catch up with in real life when all this is over.
I can't believe I've never come across Noir at the bar before. That sounds absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, well, it's kind of, it ran, Vic and Simon and Buick pulled it together, and it ran every single week in the first lockdown all the way up until I think it was about August. And it stopped then, but they now do a thing called Bay Tales, where they'll get a number of authors on. I think they've had Anne Cleves on recently, Steve Kavanagh, Peter James, people like that. So if you have a look on Twitter or Facebook, you'll be able to see kind of the events coming up. They've actually, just to get a quick plug in, they've got one coming up for one of the Northern Crime Syndicate authors, Rob Parker, on the 31st of March. So if you pop and have a look at Bay Tales, and you can sign up for that.
Oh, excellent.
And come and watch Rob's new book launch.
And we'll definitely have to have you coming along doing Whose Crime Is It Anyway once we can have real events again at the Word, because I think that'll be fabulous.
I can't wait to see how that works with a proper audience as well, like a live audience, should I say, because it's great doing it, but we can't see people when we're doing it, and you only get limited interaction through the chat, whereas if we can do it in a room and kind of people are bouncing off each other, I think that'll be fantastic. Definitely
up for that one. So can you tell us a little bit about End of the Line?
Yeah, so End of the Line is the fourth in the series, like Blue Peter. Here's one I prepared earlier. And it literally picks up minutes after book 3 finishes, because book 3 finished on a bit of a cliffhanger. And this starts immediately afterwards. For those who might not have had a chance to dip into the series, my main characters are Detective Jake Porter and Nick Stiles, both at the Met Police. Porter is the main man. Stiles is more, I guess, the sidekick. And Porter is kind of mid to late 30s, career copper. I try to steer clear from the stereotype of 3 times divorced, massive alcoholic, kind of rebelling against the system and all that kind of stuff. But he has got his fair share of baggage outside of the job. He lost his wife. She was unfortunately killed in a hit and run accident about 2 years back before the events of the book are set. And he's never quite come to terms with the fact that he couldn't, he gets justice for people in his day job, but he couldn't get justice for his own wife. So book 3 kicks off on 2 main threads, really. One, and this is no spoiler because it's in the blurb, but there is a murder of quite a high-profile vlogger, which is kind of streamed live at the start, and that's attributed to extremists, and that's broadcast to millions of people. So Porter and Stiles are thrown straight in at the deep end there, because you've got, obviously, it's a horrible, horrible crime to deal with anyway. But then against that, you've got this notion of kind of the far right looking to capitalize on that and further push their agenda, in terms of Britain for the British and all that kind of nonsense. But then set against that, the case of his wife's death resurfaces when again, I'm trying to be careful of what I say so I don't give too much away, but some new information comes to light, shall I say. And obviously Porter is discouraged from investigating this himself, but let's be honest, if that was you, certainly if that was me, I would find it really hard just to look the other way and let someone else do that. So he's obviously torn between this massive case he's investigating and what matters most to him in the world, which is getting some kind of justice and resolution for his wife's murder. And we've then got those 2 storylines kind of playing in tandem with one another, and then obviously they will splice together at some point. Whether he gets there on either front or not, I guess you'll have to read the book and find out. But he probably gets put through the ringer, I think, more in this than any of the other 3.
How did you do your research for this book, especially sort of the far right?
So in terms of the research, it's probably some of the most unpleasant research I've had to do, because it goes against everything that I subscribe to. So there was a number of things. Obviously the vast majority is online, and it was a case of reading articles, reading documentaries, or watching documentaries, looking at the kind of how that movement started, looking into the history of some of the main far right parties and groups that are around at the moment, trying to get under the skin of how they put their points across in the language they use, and how they try and almost persuade you around to their way of thinking and their beliefs and their ideology, which, as I say, bearing in mind in all the books, nasty things happen to good people in all of them, but having to get myself in the frame of mind where I could write scenes and write dialogue from the point of view of people who think like that was probably one of the more challenging things I've had to do, to be honest. And at times it kind of left a bit of a bad taste in the mouth, but I took that as a sign that it was hopefully coming out as authentic.
I've got to admit, I've just read the book and it does come over as really, really authentic, but I can guess it would be really harrowing to research some of it.
Yeah, very much so.
Would you be able to do a little reading from the book?
I will indeed, yes. So I'm gonna read from a little bit from the opening chapter. I was saying to Pauline before we started, I always agonize over what to read out when I do any readings, because I don't want to give too much away. But as I say, it's on the blurb in the Amazon listing about the murder at the start. So I'm going to start partway through chapter 1. So this is where the chap in question, the vlogger, is he broadcasts from some quite iconic locations. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the term urbexing, urban exploring, where people tend to go into abandoned buildings or disused. It could be an old hospital, a warehouse, or anything like that. And he's chosen an old magistrate's court in Greenwich, which I think is now earmarked for development, but it's at the time of writing, it was still abandoned. And it looked like such a fabulous location inside. So he set up his live broadcast in there. He started doing his broadcast, and then partway through that, a man wearing a balaclava comes into the room, and that's where we're going to pick up. The man doesn't move. He just stands there behind the glass panels, slits for eyes. It's impossible to tell anything from them. He's wearing some kind of boiler suit, dark burgundy with the logo on the breast. It's difficult to read from this distance. In case you're wondering, he begins, hearing and hating the wobble in his own voice. I'm not broadcasting this one solo. Looks like we've got a visitor, he says to his audience. He clicks the remote again, flipping the camera around to take in the room, viewing gallery and all. Say hello to the great British public, my friend. The figure is statue still. The only sign they're even breathing is a slight rise and fall of the shoulders. His own breath is shallow, tongue darting out to lick his lips like a nervous lizard. Whoever the hell this is, he isn't here to chew the fat, and he definitely isn't the bloody security guard. Come to rob the building, perhaps? Can't be anything of value left. Copper wiring, maybe. He squints, trying to make out the logo, but the sunlight streaming in is bouncing off the glass, making an already hard task impossible. Are you one of Damien Winter's boys, then? You don't frighten me, mate. You're streaming live on Facebook as well. He breaks off, leaning forwards to look at the screen. 1.3 million people and rising. You see, my friends, he says, taking a half step forwards with newfound confidence, addressing the camera. This is how they work. Damien Winter and his jackboot boys at the English Welfare Party, they intimidate. They try and silence anyone who disagrees, not with logic or argument. They do it with force. They're just... He stops mid-sentence. The man's taken a step forward of his own, almost touching the glass now. He raises a clenched, gloved fist to his own throat, drawing it across his neck with the thumb pointing inwards like a blade. The same hand drops to his breast, tapping the logo, while the other reaches inside the boiler suit. The blade appears like a magic trick. It's impossibly long, a matte black curve of steel punctuated by a row of tiny holes. Oh my God. It comes out as more of a whisper the first time. The finger taps the logo one more time. Oh my God. Halfway to a shout now. He's walked the full building twice, plotting out escape routes in case the security guard came early. And for the man to reach him, he'll have to smash the barriers or run back out and around. Either way, there's enough time to grab the phone and make a hasty exit. We best finish this up later, folks, he says, faking a smile for the camera, darts forward to retrieve it. As he does, the angle of the glare against the glass changes, and he sees the logo. The effect is instant. His eyes widen like saucers in recognition, any hint of a smile giving way to abject terror. Not one of Winter's men. He'd happily take a kicking from half a dozen of Winter's men than be here, now, with him. Hate to cut and run like this, but something tells me he's not just here for a cuppa. He's an octave higher now, giving lie to his bluff of confidence. A quick glance over his shoulder as he heads for the door, waiting for the man to make a move that never comes. And that's what seals his fate, his attention fixed on the immediate threat, his own voice masking the slightest of creaks from the other side of an open doorway that he should have heard. He sees a hand jabbed towards him holding some kind of device, but it's too late. Staccato clicks like ball bearings raining on a tabletop. The pain is 1,000 lances of shrapnel as the lights go out. He knows he's falling, but any sense of where to winks out long before he gets there. There you go.
Ooh. And if you haven't read the book, you really should, because it's absolutely fabulous. So I do love your characters, Porter and Styles. How did you come up with them?
So in the very first draft of the very first book, Porter wasn't actually the main character. If anyone's read book 2, there's a character in there called Max Brennan, who's a photographer, and he started out life as my main man. And by the time I finished the first draft of that book, he was kind of 50-50 with Porter by then. And then when I got an editor to run an eye over it, one of the first things they said was really you need to pick. You need someone to be your main voice. Readers prefer to have, obviously have other characters, but you want to have a main character and a voice driving the story forward. And at that particular time, I just thought that Porter had a little bit more about him. It was going to be more fun to write and more longevity, if, as I was thinking at that point, that it might end up being a series. And from there, it was trying to decide who he would partner well with and think about what that relationship should look like, and then trying to kind of make the best of a double act.
Who's your favourite, Porter or Styles?
I've got a soft spot for Styles. I think he's more kind of my sense of humour. He probably takes things a little bit less seriously than Porter, but at the same time, I kind of see him as a crutch that Porter doesn't realise he's leaning on.
I've noticed throughout your books as well, you do refer to them by their surname, and some of your other characters you refer to by their surname as well. Was that a conscious decision to do that?
I don't think it was, looking back. I think it was more of a subconscious thing at the time, because I was probably coloured by a lot of the stuff that I read and that I watch. That tends to be, certainly the things that I'd been watching at the time, it just tends to be more how the characters were referring to each other in a kind of the setting and the context of a team of officers. So it wasn't really a conscious choice. I guess I probably just mimicked that without thinking too much about it.
Right. And how has their relationship developed throughout the books?
Again, trying to think how to kind of say it without spoiling any of the bits and pieces that they go through, but I think it has kind of evolved. They've been through a couple of tests in terms of how much they trust each other, how heavily they rely on each other, and I guess right from the first book they were close. They had a good working relationship, but I think after what they've been through in the 4 books now, that all the different kind of trials and tribulations they've had to go through have brought them really close together, both inside and outside of work. And I think they both really understand the value that the other brings, not just as a colleague, but in terms of that support for the stuff that goes on outside the job. Porter's trying to kind of find out what happened to his wife. Styles has had a lot of stuff going on. He's just become a dad by the end of book 3. So yeah, I see Porter almost as the more, I guess, the stricter big brother of the two, whereas he needs Styles more than Styles needs Porter.
It does come across that they are very, very friendly, and also that the police are like a big family as well. That really comes across in the book, which was nice. I enjoyed that aspect.
Thank you.
Are your characters based on anyone you know?
Those two aren't.
Oh, come on, tell.
I think so. There's not one character that is 100% somebody I know. I think it's only natural to take bits and pieces from people, including myself probably, and infusing bits of them into your characters. There's one in particular who may bear a bit of a resemblance to a former boss of mine, both in kind of in looks and in mannerisms. One of the books I've written about that's set up in the Northeast that I mentioned, there's a character in there who was someone who wasn't very nice and picked on my godson. So he ended up meeting the grisly end in there.
That's great. As an author, you can do that as well.
Yeah, I remember having a chat with him over the phone, and he was kind of telling me what he'd been going through at work, and I just said, "Oh, I gave him some advice in terms of how to deal with it in the moment, anyway." And then I said, "I need a few character names. Do you want us to kill him for you?" And he was like, "What? You do that? You do that for me?" I was like, "Yeah, go on then."
That's excellent. Absolutely love that. Social media obviously plays a big part in your new book from the reading that you've given me. How important is social media to you as an author?
It's something that I'm still not convinced I'm using as effectively as I could, but it is exceptionally important, especially so over the last 12 months, where we can't go out to bookshops, we can't go to festivals. I remember when I first got my publishing deal, I was given some really helpful guidance from Alison and Busby and from my agent around what kind of presence to have and how to promote your books online, because it can't just all be about tweeting saying, here's my book, buy my book, here's a link to my book, because you'll find people will quickly turn off there. You've either reached the right people who are interested and they've bought it, and those who aren't going to buy it just because you keep badgering them. So it's a balance between trying to just, I guess, just be myself and interact with people on there, join in conversations, have opinions and all that kind of stuff. And I try and aim, if I can, don't always get it, but for about an 80-20 kind of ratio, and the 20% is me pushing my own books, and the rest is me just being me and maybe supporting other authors and retweeting their stuff and joining in on non-writing related stuff as well. So yeah, it's something I'm constantly aware that I probably need to get better at, like Instagram. I haven't got a clue how to really exploit Instagram yet, but I need to figure that one out. I've got an Instagram account and I post stuff on, but I'm not convinced I'm using it anywhere near as well as I could.
It's a steep learning curve, isn't it? Especially in the pandemic as well. Anything to do with technology, we've all been sort of forced into it.
Crash course.
Oh, definitely. Do you ever read your reviews that are posted on the likes of Amazon and things? And how do you feel if you get a bad one?
Do you know what? When the first book came out, I was looking every single day, because I was just like, oh my god, this is amazing. Like, I've been working towards this for so long. I'm going to savor every review. It's all great. I don't look that often these days. I've been quite lucky so far, and I haven't really had too many bad reviews. The last time I looked, I think I've only had one 1-star review on Amazon, and that was for What Falls Between the Cracks. But I've got off quite lightly by the looks of it, not just in the numbers, but in the content, because I've seen some really properly nasty reviews. Not just saying that I don't like the book, because I'm genuinely fine with that. If someone doesn't like it, it's not every book is for every reader. But I've seen some that they turn into more of a personal attack rather than like a critique of the book. And the 1-star on Amazon says it's only about 6 or 7 words long, and it says something along the lines of nothing different, all the same, overdone, or something like that. But I think my favourite one has to be, it was on the Apple iBook store, and again it was What Falls Between the Cracks. It was on a promotion with Apple, and this particular one was 3 stars, and it just said excellent, excellent, excellent. And I thought,
that's good.
what the hell has it got to take to get a 5-star then, if that's excellent?
Great. I love it. I know I mentioned a couple of weeks ago when I was interviewing Adam that Chris McBride, there's a few other authors, Mark Billingham, they sort of troll through just to have a laugh, because they've got like a competition to see which author can get the worst review, because they just think some of them are just bizarre,
there's quite a good game that some of us have played at times, and I think the person who started it off might have been Matt Veselovsky, because he's the first person I saw doing it. So I'll give him credit where credit's due if it was Matt. But the gist of it is, you look at your 1-star review, then click on the profile of who gave you the 1-star review, because you can see what else they've rated. So if they're giving you 1 stars, you can see what they rate as 5 stars, and it'll be like a wheelie bin, some clothes pegs, or that kind of stuff. So it really kind of hits home in terms of where you rank in the order of priorities.
Puts it all into perspective, doesn't it?
Oh, yes.
Rob, I've got a few more questions to ask you, but if anybody in the audience has anything they want to ask you, could they just pop that in the chat facility? That would be great, and then I can ask Rob those as well. So, are you a big reader? And if so, what kind of books do you like reading?
I used to read an awful lot more before I started taking the writing seriously. So by an awful lot, it's nowhere near the proportions that I've seen some. So if I look at, for example, there's a lady called Fiona Sharp who works in Waterstones and Durham. She reads over 300 books a year, which just blows my mind. A good year for me would have previously been about 120-ish, so probably about 2 books a week. These days, I'm probably more, if I'm doing well if I do a book a week at the minute. And I did have a bit of a slump reading wise, like we were talking about before, Pauline, of probably about 3 or 4 months on last side of New Year, where I was just struggling. I don't know if it was the books that I was reading. It might have just been that I wasn't being grabbed by them, but I was really, really struggling to get excited about any of them. But I've definitely got my reading mojo back now. I'm back to about a book a week. And I've already read some absolute crackers this year, including one which I think is it's my favorite one this year so far, and it's going to take some beating by the time the year's over. So yeah, definitely back there, and it's still mainly crime. I try and sprinkle in a bit of non-fiction now and again just to freshen things up. But I love crime in all its forms. Police procedural, psychological thriller, whatever it might be.
You've got to tell me what that book was. That was brilliant.
So it's not out yet. I was lucky enough to get an advance copy. And it's a chap who, I think it's his debut. It's a guy, the author's called Guy Morpus, and the book is called 5 Minds, published with Viper. And I saw on Twitter, I read about the kind of the gist of the book, and straight away it was one of those ones where you think like, oh my God, what an amazing idea. And then a week later, I managed to get a hold of a copy of the book, and I read it in 24 hours.
Oh,
and
that's brilliant.
It's one of those ones where just the concept of it, you think like, oh, why didn't I think of that?
So who are your other favourite authors?
I've got a lot of them on the shelves behind, actually. I don't know if you probably can't make out the spines, but I've if I look back at when I first really started to get into crime fiction, it was probably mainly American authors. So I love the likes of Robert Grace, Michael Connelly, Harlan Coben. Obviously not an American author, but American set series, Lee Child. And then in more recent years, the last kind of 5-6 years, that's kind of morphed more into more British stuff and a lot more regional stuff as well. We've got some great, and I'm not just plugging them because I'm part of the NCS, but the likes of Trevor, Rob Parker, Adam Peacock, Fiona, Judith, Chris McGeorge, all really, really great. Love some of the other local favourites as well, like Maury Hanna, Howard Linsky, people like that as well. And I also want to try and push myself this year to discover some new authors, which is one of the other reasons I was excited about reading that debut. But there's certain authors who I don't even need to look at what the book's about to know that I'll buy it. And a lot of the ones I've listed there are definitely in that category there.
Great. They sound brilliant. I've got a couple of questions here from the audience. One from Fiona, who is doing an event with us in a few weeks' time as well. Hi, Rob. Question for Rob. Brilliant chapter and cliffhangers. What tricks do you use to keep the writer turning the pages? I'm asking for a friend.
I try and put myself in the mind of someone who is reading it, because I know what I like to read. I tend to prefer kind of short, punchy chapters as a reader, and it needs to finish somewhere that leaves me with questions. It can't just be, and then they went to go and get a cup of coffee. It's got to be somewhere where I'm asking myself a question as I'm reaching to turn the page or to flick the Kindle screen or something like that. And ideally, some form of danger / peril, for want of a better cliche. But I always go back when I'm doing my first round of edits before I send it off to my editor. And one of the things I'll specifically look at is the end of each chapter and think, like, is that compelling enough? Can I do more? Can I tweak it?
We've got a question from Mel as well. Hi, Rob. I'm stuck for ideas for my first bestseller. Crime is my favourite genre, but I worry I will get the police stuff wrong. What tips can you share for getting the procedural stuff right? That's a good question.
So I'll give two lots of advice. The first bit would be don't necessarily do what I did, because I did the whole fake it till you make it kind of thing with book one and draft one. And I Googled what I could and I made up what I couldn't find. After that, so for part of the edits for that though, I did, and I don't know why I didn't think of this as I was writing it, but then I thought, hang on a second, like I know two former covers. Why didn't I just ask them? So I picked up the phone at one of them and met him in the pub at the time, because I was able back then, and had a whole list of questions for him. And since then, so I've got two friends who are former police officers, and also one of my friend's wives works for Northumbria Police, and she was able to put me for book 2, it was at the time, put me in touch with a serving acting superintendent. So I even got to go into the station in Newcastle and sit and have a coffee with him. And I just had a whole list of questions. I don't think you realise quite how many I had when we sat for a coffee. And it was like, in Tom and Jerry, or one of the cartoons where they open the pad of paper and it just goes like that. But it definitely does make a difference. What I try and do is not to get too bogged down in the procedure, because you've got to strike that balance between getting it right and keeping it flowing and keeping it interesting. If you speak to a lot of police officers, they'll tell you that it's not all car chases and kind of sprinting after people around the streets and that kind of stuff. A lot of it is mining through data. It's sat at your desk, it's sat on a computer, it's sat pouring through interview notes, through evidence and all that kind of stuff. So get the basics right, but don't worry too much about having to go through literally every single step, because you might, if you have chapter after chapter set at the station where people are sat at the desk staring at a screen, you're at risk of kind of losing the reader's interest as well. There are also some really good resources online. So there's a Facebook group, for example, called Cops and Writers. That is made up mainly of writers, but there are some former police officers also who are writers, and just some former cops on there who don't write but are just there to share what they know. And I've yet to come across, not just in that group, but anyone online who isn't happy to share what they've learned and their experience and that kind of stuff. So there are little groups dotted around that you can dip into. And if all else fails, for one particular aspect of one book, I even just got in touch with Northumbria Police. This is before I had that particular contact. Just got in touch with them, and they were more than happy to share some information. That was about specifically around what kind of occupational health counselling an officer would get if he went through a traumatic experience. And I got really nice response from one of the officers there who kind of shared with me what their approach was, and what that support framework looked like, and they were happy to help, happy to share.
Rob, do you have anybody that you go to for sort of forensic advice?
I was quite lucky in this respect. There was for book 3, where there's a crime scene which is it's probably, when I say it's one of my favorite crime scenes I've had to write about, that sounds really bad. I don't have like a chart of favorite crime scenes, but I enjoyed writing that particular scene, and I wanted to get it absolutely spot on in terms of what they would see, how it would look, the kind of the human remains that they found, exactly what that would look and feel like, how they would be transported from there, what that autopsy would look like. And back in 2017, I was up at Bloody Scotland at the festival in Stirling, and I'd been selected as one of their Crime in the Spotlight authors, which kind of showcases new authors. And they pair you up with some existing authors or existing people in their fields. And I was lucky enough to go on before a lady called Professor Sue Black, who I think is now Dame Sue Black. And we had a good chat beforehand, and she'd read the book before she came along. And she said at the time, if there's ever anything you want to ask, you've got my email address, just drop me a line. And that's exactly what I did for book 3. I had some really specific questions about kind of the rates of decomposition of particular bodies, and how they would fare in certain types of soil versus sand, and over what time period and all that kind of stuff. And she was superb, really, really helpful. So as I say, if you can kind of cultivate your own network of people, then they're invaluable, worth their weight in gold. But there are, as I said before, there are plenty of other little groups online you can find that. And I've even seen people on Twitter just putting a shout out saying, can anyone point me in the direction of a CSI, of a forensic anthropologist or whatever? And most of the time you'll find someone.
Excellent, because that is the definitely the kind of support you need, because it's not the kind of thing that you just know, is it? How does a body decompose?
Yeah, and it's surprisingly hard to have Googled the specific stuff that I wanted for that. And my search history by the time I reached out to Sue just looked all kinds of wrong. I was looking at kind of this, you've got these body farms over in the States and some rather unsavory images from that, and you just think like, oh my god, if I just accidentally left my laptop in a cafe and someone came up and they're like, what's he been looking at?
You'll have the police rocking up at your door.
I know.
Right, so I've got one last question for you, Rob, and just a bit of fun this one. You're stranded on a desert island, you can only take 3 books. What do you take and why?
I'm going to slightly cheat with the first one, because I came across this as I was unpacking my books when I was putting the books on the bookshelves, and I've actually got 2 sets of this. I've got, and it's the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I've got 1 set of 3 individual books, and I've got 1 just complete bound version. So I'm going to cheat and take the bound version. Because it's long, and it'll sustain me through the long cold nights on the island for more hours than a small paperback would. But also it's just it's one of the books that really stayed with me for so many years since my childhood when I first read it, and I've reread it so many times over the years. Not for quite a while now, but definitely one of my favorite books as a kid. Then the others, it's a tough one. I think one of the others I would probably go for. Like it's more out of principle, because I love the writer and I love his work, and I know I can only take one of them. But it's a book called Natchez Burning by a American author called Greg Iles, and it's the kind of book that by the time I've finished it, I just kind of sit there and shake my head and think, I could never write something as good as that. It's just absolutely superb. He's written quite a number of books, a big chunk of which are in a series, and this is the first. It's not the first in the series, but there's a trilogy that almost stands alone within the series, and it's the first of that trilogy. And if anyone hasn't heard of Greg Iles or hasn't read any of his, ideally go and start at the start of the series. But once you hit Natchez Burning and the 2 books that follow that, absolutely epic is probably the best word to describe them. He's one of those writers who you talk about cliffhangers and knowing how to keep your reader turn the pages. He's one of those writers that has literally at certain points in the book has made the jaw drop, and you're like, you didn't just do that. Oh, did not see that coming. So that would be number 2. Number 3. I'm kind of torn, actually. I'm torn between, and again, because it's a book that I read at a really kind of an interesting juncture in my life. I love The Firm by John Grisham. I've not read his last few, so I've kind of veered away from him, but I love The Firm by John Grisham, and I read that at a time when I was trying to decide what I wanted to do for a career, and that made me want to study law, which is what I ended up doing at uni, all for all the good it did me, and I never ended up going into it as a profession. So I'm kind of torn between that and probably my book of the year for last year was We Begin at the End by Chris Whittaker, which again was just it's one of those where you get to the end and just think, oh my god, that was such an incredible roller coaster of a read. And I'm not alone in that. I've seen quite a few people pick that as their book of the year for last year. So it's one that I've not gone back to yet, but I'll be amazed if I don't go back and reread that.
I've got that one on my list, actually. I haven't got around to reading that yet. But we'll let you take 4 books on the island just because we really like you, Rob. We'll be nice to you.
I was going to say, I'll smuggle one down my jumper.
Yeah, just one down your jumper. Yeah. So just before you go tonight, we've got Chris McGeorge coming up in 2 weeks. How would you sell him to our audience? Why should people come and see Chris?
So Chris, from his first book, because I read his first book before I really knew him particularly well, and certainly a long time before the NCS. And it was pitched as Chris McGeorge, the new king of the locked room mystery. And he absolutely nailed that with his first book. Again, I don't want to spoil it in any way, shape, or form, but he's got that off to a T with book 1 in particular, of such a, it's such a claustrophobic kind of setting that his characters are put in under so much pressure. And just the way that he kind of maneuvers his characters around that plot line is absolutely superb. And he's carried on that kind of, enclosed space, claustrophobic kind of feeling through his other books as well. The next one after that is set. It's a real life set, and it's called the Stand Edge Tunnel. And it's a lot of it takes place in and around that. After that, he set a book that centers around a murder that takes place in a locked prison cell. So he's come up with some really innovative ways to explore that whole locked room aspect. So yeah, if you've not read Chris, you've got 2 weeks to crack on and get at least one of them read before then, and honestly, you won't regret it.
I agree, Rob. I've read the first 2, and I've got his new book to read, and they're absolutely brilliant.
But, and have you heard of his next one that he's got coming out?
No.
He's going to kill me because I can't remember the title of it. But it's one of those where the concept, you're like, oh my god. Fiona, can you pop in the chat? Can you remember the name of the one that he's told us about? Because I'm drawing a blank. I've had a long day staring at Zoom screens for work.
Yeah. Oh, he'll tell us that everyone will have to tune in next time, and he's with us on the 11th of March. So
yeah. I don't want to spoil it. Oh, Fiona's brain dead too. But just remember to ask him about his next one coming out as well, because it's an absolutely class idea. So
definitely
one that I'm very jealous of.
Well, thank you so much for this evening, Rob. Thoroughly enjoyed that. It's been great talking to you, and we will definitely have you at the Word when we can have people in our buildings.
Thanks. Thank you very much for having us, and thanks everyone for coming along. And hopefully I haven't made anyone miss the tea or anything like that. So I'll.
As you say, thanks to the audience, and please join us on the 11th for Chris as well. That would be great. So thank you.
Fab, thanks for having us, and I'll hopefully see you in person sometime soon.
Definitely. Bye,
nice
everyone.
One. Thank you.